Am I supposed to begin now, or?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to start.
Well, I just logged in to get ready waiting, so it's nice to make your acquaintance. Good morning.
Pleased to meet you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Wayne.
Yes, it's so good to see everyone on this morning. And Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to go ahead and introduce you. All right.
Wonderful.
So we are pleased to have Craig here with us. And I want to start off with a quote that he shared by Toby Mack. Rock bottom will teach you lessons that the mountaintop never will. Wow. 2020 has been an unprecedented year, right? So we've grappled with worldwide pandemic, national unrest, and a cybersecurity attack on our very own healthcare system. It was a year, we're glad that it's over. So as we take a pause and review the year, may we discover that what we've learned and the valuable lessons, how we stretched ourselves in ways we never thought possible, or amazed ourselves with our strength and resiliency and courage. So this is not the one that I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
This is, okay. So this does not sound like Craig. Yes, but nonetheless,
All good thoughts.
yes, all good thoughts. And I think you have a quote from Dr. King. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Finding light in the darkness. So
Right.
darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So Craig has spent almost his entire adult life investigating, analyzing, and litigating violent crimes, in particular, homicide, sexual assaults, and intimate partner violence. He stated, "It is a world where the worst of humanity preys upon the weak and the helpless, the innocent and the vulnerable." Craig will share with us those things that kept him grounded, prevented him from becoming jaded and cynical, and motivated him to work in such a world. In essence, what inspired him to do the work that he did. Craig was a law enforcement officer for 25 years, 21st as a special agent for the FBI. He retired from Behavioral Analysis Unit of the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime and provided behavioral support in violent crime matters to federal and state and local and foreign law enforcement agencies. These came into the form of crime analysis, offender analysis, crime scene analysis, investigative strategies, interview strategies, and interrogation strategies, indirect personality assessments, major case management, and trial strategies. And since his retirement in 2009, Craig has worked as a consultant with attorneys in numerous homicides, including capital cases, sexual assaults, intimate partner violence trials, from the pretrial stage through the adjudication of the case. He provided services such as case organization and management, discovery management, crime analysis and crime reconstruction, and even 3D modeling, direct cross-examination strategies for lay expert witnesses. Craig has a BS in criminology and an MS in psychology, and is the co-author of Investigate and Forensic Interviewing. Investigative and Forensic Interviewing, a personality-focused approach, and author of Crime Investigation Analysis, a move toward scientific multidisciplinary model handbook of behavioral criminology. Craig also provided extensive training both nationally and internationally in the areas of psychology and behavior, investigation and case management regarding homicide, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence. So without further ado, Craig, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I want to thank everyone for logging on to Monday Morning Inspirations. It's just a great way to start off a week. And we're really grateful that you're a part of that. So please, without further ado, welcome.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone. And thank you for taking your time to listen to me. I just wanted to sort of start out with how I arrived at where I'm at. I grew up in a fairly lower socioeconomic blue-collar background in New York, where there wasn't much emphasis on education and certainly any kind of real career goals. And by the time I was 18, I, for a variety of reasons, knew that I had to leave that environment. And so I spent 3 years hitchhiking around the country, working as a laborer in construction. And then by the time I was 21, I figured I need to find some direction in my life. I really need to do something with myself. So I enlisted in the military. Based on my construction background, they put me in engineering. And by the time I was 23, I was married, had 2 infant children, and still no real direction in my life. And I found myself transferred to an Air Force base in Omaha, Nebraska in 1982. I took my 2 young girls down to the park, and I met another couple with their children, and I struck up a conversation with the husband. And he told me he was an investigator with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. For some reason, it really struck a chord with me. There was something appealing about it. And I asked him how he ended up in that line of work. And he said, well, it's a special duty assignment and you just apply. And they send you to school and teach you how to be an investigator. So I did that. And I became an agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations and became an investigator in the violent crime area. And my first real exposure to violent crime was in 1983 in Omaha, Nebraska. And there were several young boys that were abducted and murdered in the community. And for those of us that remember that time frame, we didn't have the 24-hour-a-day news coverage of the awful things that human beings can do to one another on a daily basis. Back then, we just were not really desensitized to it. And we always had that sense in our community that that kind of thing wasn't here. It was somewhere else. But the fear that ran through the community was real, and you could feel it. And working on the investigation, even though I was relatively new and inexperienced, and I didn't have a major role in the investigation, the one thing that I saw was the grief and the devastation of the families of the victims and the real fear, like I said, that ran through the community. And there was just something about it. And for the first time, even though I couldn't put my finger on it then, I felt like there was a direction in my life, even more, maybe a sense of purpose. Like I said, even though I didn't know it at the time. So I started going to school nights and weekends. I got a degree in criminology. And after 8 years of being in the military, I left, applied with the FBI and was accepted. And I became an agent with the FBI and worked violent crime. I then got a degree in my master's degree in psychology, and I transferred to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico. And this is where I really started to become immersed in homicides, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence. Those were the areas that I worked there. And I spent every single day just looking at cases, the worst of the worst. And I traveled around the world helping agencies to sort of look at the cases, to analyze the cases, to prosecute the cases. And what I found in doing that is that there were several things when you start looking at violent crime and you start every single day of your life almost looking at the real darkness of it, right? It's just, it's an awful thing when you look at people that are victimized, when you look at the sort of proverbial ripples of the pond, you know, the effect that runs through families and friends and loved ones and people that know them and the community and everything else. And it's just far reaching effects, and they're often devastating, and just the violence itself. And so the interesting thing about it for me is that the first thing I noticed is that, one, I have a sort of natural curiosity in all sorts of things. But I also have, paired with that, is this ability to focus on detail. So when I'm looking at a homicide, if I'm looking at a really bad sexual assault or intimate partner violence, I am looking at the details in such a way that I'm able to sort of compartmentalize the overall darkness of it, the tragedy of it, where I don't bring it with me. I don't take it home with me. I don't let it affect me in that emotional way, because I'm so focused on the details in the sense of finding out what happened and to sort of help in some way. So the first ability for me in terms of being able to take something positive out of what I do on a daily basis is just that ability to focus on the details. But next is, I guess I've always had this real strong sense of right and wrong. And so when I see an injustice, I feel like I need to do something to right the wrong in some way. And I feel on a case-by-case basis, I'm able to do that. I'm able to see the worst of humanity and be able to see a light at the end of that tunnel in terms of bringing about some sense of justice, of righting that wrong. And then next is, believe it or not, in this line, one of the best sort of qualities you can have, or sort of spectrum of traits, is in the empathy area, empathic abilities. And it seems sort of counterintuitive that you would look at this kind of behavior, and if you have a real strong sense of empathy, of compassion, of all of those empathic emotions, you would think that it would eat away at you. You'd think that you would need to find something else to do. But the fact of the matter is that it allows you to maintain that sense of compassion. It allows you to deal with the people that are affected. And I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with victims. I've dealt with families of victims, with loved ones, with friends. And the one thing that you can't, I think, pull off without being sincere is a sense of caring, of giving them some sense that people out there care, that they want to help them. They want to bring about, in some small measure anyway, a sense of closure. And that's real. It's real for those people that deal with violent crime on a daily basis, that are victims, that they have people that have been senselessly hurt by violence. And they really cling to the hope that there are people out there that do care, that want to give everything they can give to help them in some way. And so I'm able to do that. And it's something that is incredibly powerful in terms of when you reach that point in an investigation or the litigation process where you have arrived at the point where you have brought that maybe sense of closure in some way. It's a feeling that is indescribable. I tell people all the time, if you work in this world and you ever have an opportunity to feel that, you'll know it when you feel it. It's amazing. And on the other side, I've been involved in cases where people have been wrongly accused, and to get this sense of bringing about justice for them. So I've worked both sides of the spectrum, and it's an amazing feeling. And then I think along with that, I have this strong sense of faith. I was raised a Roman Catholic, but I would describe myself as more spiritual than religious. But I have a strong faith in something greater than ourselves, and a strong belief in the goodness of humanity. There's evil in the world. I've seen it, but I think that's that sense of faith that I have always keeps me cognizant of the belief that the vast majority of people, I think, are kind and decent and have goodness in their hearts. And I believe that, and it keeps me grounded. It keeps me from becoming cynical in what I do, and to always keep that focus and sense of compassion. And then the last thing I would say that sort of always keeps this light around me when I'm working in this world is this strong desire to pass on what I've learned in training. I've trained people from mental health professionals to law enforcement to prosecutors to all sorts of groups all over the world in terms of criminal behavior, offender behaviors, victim behaviors, how to go about looking at cases, primarily in those three areas that I deal in. And then now at this point in my life, I actually am working with some people and putting together a software program that I am hoping will bring some sense of standardization to how investigators approach cases and look at cases in conjunction with prosecutors and the defense, where everybody is on the same table. They're doing the same things. They're operating in the same ways. They're sharing information. They're cooperating, and bringing a sense of efficiency and effectiveness to the criminal justice system, so that things don't slip through the cracks, that you do the right things. And it's a process that doesn't exist right now, and I think it should. I think it would help immensely. And so that's where I'm at now. So those are the things that keep me grounded, keep me always looking forward, that always allow me to feel like I have this light around me whenever I'm looking at these awful things in these cases. And it's something that, you know, for me, I look back now and I say, it really is a sense of purpose. And it's not the path that I started on, that I consciously chose to go down, but it's clear to me now that it was the path I was meant to take. And that's where I find myself now. So I'll open it up, and if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear them.
Yes, sir. Good morning. So it's very interesting to see you again, because you and I have met twice before. Once at Offutt Air Base back around '83, and another time in Quantico, probably around '92. I was a Navy chaplain.
Okay.
I met you at Offutt. There was like some horrible event, and they put together a bunch of inter-service chaplains. And
Yes.
then once again in Quantico, when I was working up at the Pentagon, there were some horrible things happening
Yes.
in Quantico, and they needed like a chaplains group to come down and learn how to deal with family trauma. So it's really nice to see you again.
You know, that's fascinating that you were at Offutt during that time frame, because you know, it's something that I wouldn't expect anybody to even know. But yeah, that was really the event that started me on the path that I'm on. It just for some reason it resonated with me in terms of being able to help, and much like you do as a chaplain, is to have this sense of providing something in times of darkness for people. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you, sir.
Wow, this is a small world. The fact that
Yeah.
like you talked about some of the beginnings of your career, and Jonathan and you encountered each other then. And now you're talking about, after going through this career for years, meet Jonathan once again.
Once again, that's amazing. It really is.
Yeah. I really appreciated what you said about being able to focus on the details, focus on the duty at hand. And you said that you were able to not take it home with you. You were able to compartmentalize. and the reason why I'm asking that is because, you know, this is hospice and we're not dealing with crimes, but we are dealing with end of life, and we are dealing with in many cases pain and sadness, and many of our volunteers and employees get attached to patients and families. How did you learn to compartmentalize and not take it home with you?
Yeah, and I think for all of us that deal in this type of world, and you do as well, it's not somebody taking somebody's life like it is in my world, but it's the end of a life, and people are still feeling that sense of loss and that sense of grief, and you see it firsthand. And just as an aside, I have a healthy respect for that. It's interesting because I seem to deal better in a world where it's a homicide and it's a past event than I do with somebody suffering in front of me. I deal with it, but it hurts my heart so much. But in what I do, I think when I first started it, I allowed myself to let the emotion in while I was working, that allowed myself to really feel the pain and the loss. And what I found was it didn't help me do the best job that I could with the case, with the investigation. And I did learn, and it took time to sort of feel my way through and say, how do I look at crime scene photographs of just awful things and spend hours looking through them? And then I realized if I understood that I need to focus on that detail, it takes my mind away from it. And I also looked at it from this respect, that I told myself that the victim is in a better place, that what has happened, and they're now in a better place. And it sort of removes that emotional component. But it took me a while. But what I did learn in that process is that I'm much more effective if I can maintain control on those emotions and letting it come in and stay with me and taking it home.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or comments?
What happens in cases where you can't figure out what happened, when you can't solve the problem?
Yes, it's those are probably the toughest cases. What's interesting, you tend to find with cases that don't get resolved in some way, right? You tend to put them into two groups. One is you formulate an idea, right? The evidence tells you that this happened. So you formulate a theory that you believe happened, but there just isn't enough evidence to make an arrest or to get a conviction. That's one. The second is, and it's a rarity, is that you look at a case and you cannot determine. I actually have a case like that now where I don't know what happened. It's a rarity that the evidence doesn't give you some idea. So in both of those cases, here's how I look at it. And the same as if I go to trial and if it doesn't come out the way I anticipate it, I believe that for whatever reason, that's you do your best and the outcome is really out of your hands. You know, those cases stay with me though. I believe more than the ones that I am successful in, the ones that I'm not, and they're not that many, but they do happen. But they do stay with you. But I also look at them and say, for whatever reason, that's just the way it is, and I have to accept it. I can't let it eat away at me. I can't let it just derail me in the other things that I do. So those are tough. Those are tough cases. And I think probably the toughest cases for people in this line of work are the ones where there was no closure, there was no conclusion, there was no righting the wrong. But it's something you just deal with.
Well, This has been extremely inspiring, and there were so many intersections that touched on our work in our space in hospice. So the idea of the sense of caring, right? The sense of closure, the strong sense of faith, and even the desire to pass on what you have learned. So Gilchrist is a learning environment as well.
Hey, Wayman, can I ask another question?
Sure, John.
So I have so here's my question. So working in the field as a chaplain as I do, I try to put myself into the mindset of the people whom I'm caring for. And sometimes I find that in a strange way to be a cathartic process to help me understand how or why they're suffering. So when you deal with some horrible events, can you put yourself into the mind of the perpetrator?
It's a little different. I feel like, if I'm being honest, I think when I look at it, there are sort of two linear paths, right? Parallel paths that are going on. It's the victim and the offender, and the behaviors and the reasons they do the things that they do during the event, and then what ultimately leads to the outcome. One is the victim, much like you. I find that I put myself in sort of that position, and probably the toughest time for me in every case that I work is when I'm going through the actual crime and I'm breaking it down, and I reach that moment where I'm sort of feeling what the victim would be feeling and understanding this is the moment they realize that maybe they're going to die, right? Or whatever it is, what's going to happen to them. The realization is there. Those are the worst moments for me. But I also feel like part of that helps me, and it is that sort of cathartic process that you talk about. Then the other one is the offender. And that's the one that's much more difficult, because when you talk about offender behaviors, sometimes, and what's interesting is motive is never an element of a crime. Like, people want to know why you do something, but you don't have to prove why somebody does what they did in a crime in a courtroom. And the reason for that is that motivation is so complex sometimes. It's rooted in so many things that maybe even the offender doesn't realize why he or she is doing the things that they're doing. So it's much harder. And I remember when I went to the behavioral analysis unit, I would listen to people talk about how they put their selves into the mind of the serial killer. Sometimes you can sort of put yourself in the shoes of the offender, but sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you can't fathom, the kind of behavior that you see in some of these crimes. There's just nothing in that you can look at or put yourself in to understand how they've arrived at the point they've arrived where they're doing whatever they're doing. So it's difficult. And I feel it's much more along the lines of what you do when I'm dealing with the victims than I'm dealing with the offenders. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Craig. Good morning.
Good morning, Diane. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? I just wanted to thank you so much for spending your morning with us and imparting your wisdom. We are
Thank you.
so grateful. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you for reaching out and asking me to do this. It's been an honor and a pleasure. It really has. Good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And this has been something extraordinarily inspirational because it connected on so many levels, and there are so many parallels to some of the work that we do here at hospice during pivotal moments of closure and coming to terms. And we really appreciated the idea of caring, but not fully taking it home with you and navigating this difficult emotion. So we thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. So I hope everyone has a wonderful Monday morning. Thanks for joining us and starting your week off in an inspirational way. And take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.